So this lesson we're going to start working with validations now. And why do we want to validate in the front end or in the client side in the Angular application, since Firebase is already sending me validations back, right? Well, it's because I don't want to stress Firebase with taking care of validation that it actually doesn't need. So let's just let the client, before I can even click the sign up button, let the client figure out if you're actually valid before I even send a request to Firebase and ask it to create a user. So front-end validation is just to help out, to avoid stressing your backend. Your backend still needs to do validations anyway, but we can kind of help it to not get overloaded by actually adding these validations. So let's just try and add a simple validation in Angular. Now I've found the information that I'm going to show you guys in the next couple of lessons. I've found that inside Angular.io, under fundamentals, under forms, and form validation and reactive forms. Because I'm using reactive forms in my case, but there's also template driven forms. So if you're more into that, go and see that tutorial instead and work with those. I've also made a video about that at some point in my life. So okay, let's try and use reactive forms and form validation right here to kind of get some validation that when I go in here and if I don't have an email, it should show up some kind of warning right here. Let's try and do it. Jumping into the code. Now the first thing I need to do is kind of set up the actual validation, right? To kind of, in my code, explain that if you're in the sign up form and you're trying to do something with the email right here, you have to explain to the system if there's an error, right? Now you do that by actually first of all explaining to the email. Right now it's just a very dumb email just saying this is a string, it's doing nothing else. But I want this field to be a bit more, so I'll surround it with an array right here to explain I'm going to send in more information to the email now than just being a string. That pretty much means that now I can actually send in a validator. So let's just do a basic validator right here. Validators, there we go. And then let's just say for now that I want this validator to be, or this email to be a required field. Now the validators, that's just a static Angular setup that has a predefined set of validators that you can use. One of them is required. So let's just import this guy and then just have this required validator on the email right now. So now that I've set this up, it actually means that when I go in here and I don't put in anything, it changes color, right? So it changed from green into blue, right? Now why is it blue? That's actually because I set up a bad theme right here. I said warnings are actually blue right now in my theme. So let's just go and fix that right away because that's just stupid. So let's just put in red here again. This was just me playing around with the theme in earlier videos. So I'm going to say warnings should actually be a red color. Let's just try and do that and have a look. Now these guys will turn into red as well because I added those as warnings, but I don't think they should be warnings. I'll fix that later. But at least I think when I'm leaving this guy, it should show me a red color to explain this is a warning. So now that's all I had to do. Now I'm using the right theme colors. Sweet. So now we can see there's something wrong here, but I don't know what is wrong. So that's going to be the next step. But let's just add some more validation types right here. If I start typing now, the warning will go away, right? So now it's not, the error is not there anymore because I had something, but it's still not a valid email. So let's try and add another validator right here to our email. So jumping back to the sign up component and adding another validator. So there we go. I'll just add again, notice another set of array brackets or square brackets to kind of explain I don't only have one validator, I'm going to have multiple validators for this email, and I'll just add another validator right here called email. So now it needs to be two things. It needs to be there and it needs to be an email, right? So that's kind of how you can add multiple validators to a single field. So let's just try and go in here again. Now let me just try and add this. It gets red, even though there's actually some text. Again, if I remove this, it's still red. So now it both explains that it needs to be actual text and it needs to be a valid email. And then it's okay, right? So that's kind of how you add these guys. This is pretty awesome stuff. So it's fairly simple to add the validations, but of course we also want the errors, and we're going to look at that for the next lesson. Let's actually add a required validator down here as well. So we say you're actually required to also contain a password, which makes sense because you cannot create a user without a password in my system. That's kind of why I'm going to add this guy. And down here, let's also add the required property for the repeat password. Again, it's going to be, I'm going to actually force that into being the same as this password, making a custom validator later. So it's not really required to add this down here, but I'm doing it anyway. So now we kind of set this up that all of these are required, and this is even required to be an email to kind of make this work. So now you'll notice that if I click around here, they'll all turn red slowly because I kind of need them, right? So that's all I had to do. Now I'm using the actual required keywords for the form. So now that the control actually knows that they're required. I'm still not telling the user the problem, but at least I can show now in the UI that these guys are required, and this is even not only required, it's actually required to be an actual valid email. There we go. That's it for this lesson. Next lesson, let's try and show the error to the user so he knows what's wrong with the actual field. See you next time.